a little bit different. We've been in partnership with Cargill for a very long time. You know, it started off as this little project, exploratory project, and now we're hot and heavy. I should say that our staff is hot and heavy. I don't have anything to do with it, but I just want to welcome you here and say thank you for working so cohesively with our staff. We value our staff very much, and so the way you treat them and you know, I think is testament to maybe a working partnership that we will have later on. So thank you for being here, and Jackie, I look forward to your introduction.
Thanks, Chair Cutter. What I thought I would do is, before introducing my Cargill co-presenters, I would name off some of the other folks that are listening in who are a part of the broader Cargill project team supporting the studies that we've been engaged in that we'll talk a little bit about. So Andrea Shepard is our lead for the CEQA analysis with Ascent Environmental. Rachel Phillipson has been managing the Brown and Caldwell team that's been doing the due diligence technical work in support of this project. Tom Hall with EOA wears two hats. He has long supported EBDA with our permit renewals and other NPDES permitting issues, and he is engaged with Cargill to analyze permit implications of this project. And then Greg Newmark is with Myers-Nave. He's Eric's partner and has been playing a key role in looking at leading a team of Myers-Nave attorneys looking at the legal implications for this project and how we best protect and represent EBDA. So that's just a few of the names you see that are not associated with Cargill. I'll also note Lauren Facinto is one of Cargill's managers looking at land and CEQA issues, so she's listening in. And then I will be co-presenting with Tim Ullman and Don Brown of Cargill, who have been really driving this project forward since October of 2019, when they first approached us to explore this potential project in partnership. So
Jackie, can I say real quick, and I appreciate you having pictures on, because for those of us that don't know you, to be able to look at a face when you're talking and so forth is really important. So thank you for that.
Thanks. So by way of introducing this presentation, I've mentioned in the past, we've been updating the commission and the O&M committee in particular about this project as we've moved it forward since October of 2019, and all of the twists and turns that this project has taken mainly from a technical perspective. And we've been so in the weeds each month talking about those twists and turns that I realized it had been a while since we'd really taken a step back and reminded ourselves why we're doing this, what this project is about at a high level, what's in it for Cargill, what's in it for EBDA, and so the purpose of this presentation is really to increase the commission's comfort level with staff continuing to engage in this project, and make sure that everyone just has a common baseline understanding of the goals of the project, where we've been and where we're going. And then we'll talk at the end a little bit about where the decision points are for the commission. I'll say that this is intended to be a dialogue, so we are going to share a set of slides. Cargill's going to present some of those. I'm going to present some of those, but commissioners definitely feel free to jump in. We can do raised hands in Zoom, or we can just have folks speak up to ask questions. The goal of this is to increase your understanding and comfort level, and so we want to make sure that we're doing that by getting all of your questions answered as they come to you. So don't feel the need to hold them till the end. We want this to be a dialogue, and some of the questions Cargill may answer, some I may answer, some I may look to Greg or to our technical consultants. but we have the team here that can hopefully answer the questions that the commission may have about how we've gotten to this point and where we're going next. So with that, I'm going to let Tim and Dawn introduce themselves, and I will get our slideshow started.
Okay, well, I'll jump in first. I'm Tim Ullman. Been working on this project for several years now, and I am what we call the integrated project manager. So just trying to pull all the loose ends together and keep the team on an aligned path to move forward towards success. And very pleased to have the opportunity to give you the update today.
And I will just jump in and say that Tim is an excellent project manager. He has some of the best project management skills and spreadsheets that I've seen.
It's not just the big whip I carry.
Yeah. I'm Don Brown, and I'm a Director of Government Relations for Cargill. And I've been working on this project now for several years as well. And while Jackie's calling up the presentation, I appreciate those kind words, Chair Cutter. We'd also like to extend our appreciation to Jackie and her staff and the people we've been working with the member agencies. They've been very collaborative, respectful, and willing to think how we can get this proposed project done. And we just really could not ask for a better partner as we explore this proposed project. So again, thank you. And thank you, Commission members, for your time today. We got the deck coming up. Wouldn't be a meeting without a PowerPoint presentation, so we had to.
Yeah, we thought that some of the graphics here would help illustrate what we're talking about and understand the project. So can everyone see the slides? Okay.
I can.
Great. So then I will go ahead and let Cargill kick things off with a little bit of overview of their background and experience in the Bay Area. And Dawn and Tim, just say next slide when you want me to advance them for you.
Sure. You can advance the next slide. This is just, Cargill does not, they sell food ingredients to other food companies who then incorporate our ingredients into their final products. We don't have a lot of direct to consumer products, but we do have our salt business. And if you've ever gone to the store and seen Diamond Crystal, you will, that is a Cargill product. And whether we use it for both for food purposes and water quality. And if you see the sea salt product that Diamond Crystal has, that is, we're the only major solar sea salt facility in the US. So it is more than likely that that sea salt has come from our Newark location. And we get chefs apparently rate sea salt and they rate ours as the best. So we're very, very proud of that. So it's a great product, and it's terrific that it's made right here in the Bay Area. You can go to the next slide, Jackie. So this is an overview of our Newark salt ponds. And Cargill has been operating these, or our predecessor company. We purchased Leslie Salt back in the 70s. And so we've been, these salt ponds have been in operation for over 70 years. And we maintain a working landscape of about 12,000 acres. And the process, which Tim will go into a little more detail later, it's a very simple process. We use no additives. We use the sun and the wind and bay water to produce the sea salt from that location. And each year that facility can produce 500,000 tons of sea salt. And in addition to which we think of sea salt sodium chloride, the facility also produces a product, magnesium chloride, that's used for road de-icing and dust suppressant. And some of that dust suppressant is used in California vineyards to keep the dust down off the roads. And as far as employment, we've got 200 union and management jobs at that facility. And we've worked to be good stewards of the San Francisco Bay. And Cargill has worked with public wildlife agencies to help them acquire over 40,000 acres of San Francisco Bay salt pond properties over the years. And the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge is one of those partnerships that we worked with the federal agency. And we've contributed over $150 million of land value in the South Bay over the years. I'll turn it over to Tim and he'll explain a little bit more about how we make salt. So next slide, Jackie.
So yeah, this slide provides a very high-level view of our Newark operations. And basically what we do is we take in bay water off of what we call the Coyote Slough. It's also known as the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel. Basically seawater quality bay water comes into the ponds, and over time it circulates through the ponds. And as Don just mentioned, the fundamental purpose here is evaporating water, concentrating up the salt concentration by over 10-fold. In fact, most all of the water that comes in is evaporated. And in the process, we eventually crystallize out salt. As Don indicated, our primary product is sodium chloride, by far the most prevalent salt in seawater, but there are other salts in seawater. So the brine that comes out of those sodium chloride crystallizers gets further evaporated, other salts crystallize out, and ultimately we produce a very highly concentrated brine of magnesium chloride. Magnesium chloride is not produced as salt crystals, but rather as this concentrated brine. There are several other salts in seawater, and those do not end up in our commercial products. Rather, they get crystallized out, particularly in the mixed sea salt ponds that are shown in green there. And whereas they're at relatively low concentration in seawater and bay water, those salts have accumulated within those two ponds, ponds 12, ponds 13, that are shown in green here. The next slide shows a close-up figure of ponds 12 and 13, the edge of those ponds. And what you see on the left is several inches of this magnesium chloride brine concentrating up, crystallizing out some of the other salts, and eventually getting harvested. That's pond 12 is the one close to us. In the middle here is a tidal slough. It's Plummer Slough is what it's called, as well as a marsh area around the tidal slough that supports wildlife, including several endangered species. And then in the upper right corner, you can see the white salt. That's pond 13, where we have drained off the magnesium chloride product stream. And here you see what's left behind, what the mixed sea salts, as we call them, that have accumulated in ponds 12 and 13. That's what they look like after we've drained off the product brine. We have spent many years, many decades trying to develop markets for that residual mixed sea salts. Most of what's in there is magnesium sulfate, which is also known as Epsom salt. It has commercial value, but we have not yet figured out how to connect the dots and actually be able to produce that and market it commercially. As you can also see in this picture, our ponds in that tidal slough and the very rich marsh habitat in between, they're separated by these earthen berms. And a primary component of our overall operation of the site is the continued maintenance of those berms in order to maintain the segregation between these ponds and the marsh and the bayfront as well. The thing that threatens this in the long term, as we've realized in recent years, is sea level rise. Whereas we've got plenty of capacity to continue accumulating these mixed sea salts and continuing to work on figuring out markets for them, sea level rise provides a timeline, although a long timeline. It is a very realistic timeline for we need to figure out ways of harvesting, removing these mixed sea salts long before sea level rise starts to threaten the integrity of the berms that separate these ponds from the bay. That's what this project is all about. So the next slide talks about okay, we've looked at many different options of, okay, what could we do with these mixed sea salts if not market them? One is to remove them from the ponds and well, do some sort of what we call land-based placement of these. Everything from just cap them in place to truck them to a landfill to deep well inject them as a brine. But all those land-based options would retain long-term environmental risks of that salt being in an unnatural environment that could eventually be exposed, be compromised. And so we really shifted towards the option of what really makes sense is put these salts back into the bay, back into the ocean from where they came, where thus there would be no long-term environmental risk in doing that. And as we've looked at the different options everywhere from putting it into a barge and discharging it out in the deep ocean to directly discharging it into the bay from the Cargill facility to ultimately the solution that makes the most sense and has the least environmental risk and impact is the project that we're working on in partnership with EBDA, and that is to integrate our brine in with their effluent. And the reason that is by far the best option is that the risk of discharging these salts, they're naturally existing salts, but if we discharge them at too high a concentration, they can have some short-term environmental impacts locally to where they're being discharged. The big benefit of working with EBDA is the freshwater effluent that they have allows us to blend in our brine, reduce the salinity down to levels that are at or below the salinity of the bay, and thus discharge them without any potential hypersalinity risks, if you will. It's also the option that has by far the lowest greenhouse gas emissions due to transportation or whatever, as well as avoids traffic impacts and so forth. So having spent a few years now on sorting through the options, this is clearly the most environmentally friendly approach for us to deal with these residual mixed sea salts. The next slide, I think, is just a transition slide about, so what is the project? This slide shows that the basic concept is, first of all, we've developed some technology to squeeze a little more product value out of these mixed sea salts in those two ponds. About 20% of the volume can be recovered as commercial products. And then take what's left, dissolve it in bay water to create about a 30% brine, transfer that brine to EBDA and blend it in with their effluents. So right now, the big challenge that we're working through is how do we do that transfer? And in particular, how do we build a pipeline from the Cargill facility to the EBDA system? in order to get it into their effluent blended in and allow discharge into the bay. So the overall proposal is to construct a pipeline. We're working on route options. We feel like we're narrowing in on that. We have also engaged with local building trades towards developing a project labor agreement for that construction project. As the previous slide showed, we're looking at pumping at anywhere from oh, sorry. Was there a question or comment? No. Okay, so 1 to 2 million gallons a day of brine discharge. That's a continuous 24-hour a day transfer from our facility. At the 1 million gallons a day, we should be able to process and remove all of the mixed sea salts over 20 years. At 2 million gallons a day, it'd take about 10 years to complete the process. And going through due diligence with Jackie and her team, we're narrowing in on just what is the range of flow rates that we want to be operating at, and it's looking like 2 million gallons per day is something that can be easily accommodated, but still working on some of those details. One of the key aspects of this is, whereas we want to pump 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 350 days a year, we certainly have the capability to discontinue our discharge if and when situations come up where capacity of the system is pushing limits due to whether it's a particularly heavy rainstorm or any other sort of process upsets. We can very easily shut things down until those sort of issues are resolved and then started back up again. Obviously, even though we did spend a lot of effort, working Tom Hall and Jackie and others to demonstrate that adding the salt would not compromise your ability to meet your NPDES effluent limits, monitoring of compliance would be a critical part of the process. Then, the timeline, as I said, 10 to 20 years is what we think we need. When we started in 2020, we were thinking, well, that aligns really well with your JPA, which extends to 2040. But as it's taken a couple of years for us to resolve issues, that timeline's shortening, and Cargill would definitely have an interest in the opportunity to continue utilizing the pipeline and the effluent beyond that time frame. But for right now, we're working very hard on trying to get these 2 ponds processed in that time frame. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, initially when we first got started, the thought was, okay, we'll tie into the closest point in the system that's just downstream of the Alvarado treatment facility. That would have been fine with respect to compliance with your effluent permit. But as we dug deeper and looked at, well, what would this salinity potentially, are there risks to the system? And in fact, that first segment of pipeline, it turns out that large sections of it are, the pipe is not full of effluent discharge, and there's a large air gap in the top of the pipe. The oxygen in the air combined with the added chloride levels from the salinity, as we engaged with some corrosion experts, that would potentially have a significant impact on corrosion of the reinforced concrete pipe. And so we switched gears and are looking at, well, how do we avoid that section of the system where the air gaps exist? And so we are now working on how do we extend the pipeline, basically double the length in order to tie in at or just beyond the Oraloma facility, because beyond that point in the system, the pipe is fully submerged from there all the way out to the outfall. And so the challenge of of getting the pipeline, that entire 15 plus miles is currently the process that we're working through. The next slide. Let's see, improve the result. So yeah, this is just a high level overview of things that we'd already talked about. What are our goals? How do we improve the resilience of our pond systems? And how do we do it in a way that's sustainable, utilizing of this existing system?
All right.
With that, turn it over.
Yeah, I'm going to take it from here and talk a little bit about EBDA's drivers and kind of what's in it for EBDA. Why have we been engaged in this process? But before I do that, I thought I'd just pause and see if there are questions or comments.
Thank you, Jackie. So I'm looking over at my colleagues to see if there are any questions, and I'm not seeing any.
I think Commissioner Duncan has a hand up.
Oh, I'm not seeing it on the here. Okay. Yeah, if you could raise your hand on that little thing, that way all of it's in one place. But Commissioner Duncan, if you have your hand up, please do.
Okay. My question is the slide that shows, you said that you only are able to use 20% of the, for commercial use of the salt, and that 80% is what you have to discharge. Is that correct?
Well, let me put that in the context. In terms of the salinity in the bay water that we process, we recover well over 95% of the salinity as product. It's that few percent that is not recovered as product that has accumulated in these mixed sea salt ponds. The further processing of that, we can squeeze out another 20% of that very small fraction of what was originally in the seawater. We are going to capture some additional commercial value first in order to further minimize how much salinity we would be discharging into the EBDA system. Does that help?
Yes, a little bit. I was just looking at your slide that showed the commercial amount, and then the the other, and it's at 2080. And so I guess my last question is, so what are you doing now with it? Are you just storing it, or what? Yes,
we're storing it in those ponds, and we've been spending decades trying to figure out how to generate a commercial product from that. It's just because of sea level rise, even though we've got the capacity to continue accumulating more of it, we've decided now is the time to just quit hoping that the commercial outlet will develop and remove it prior to sea level rise jeopardizing the integrity of the berms.
And your projection is it's going to take 20 years to
10 to 20 years 10 to 20 years depending on where we end up in working with Jackie and her team on deciding at what flow rate would we be transferring the brine into the EBDA system.
And you're saying that your company purchased it from Leslie Salt back in 1978?
I'll defer back to Don.
Yeah,
is that the date?
Okay. And so when did Leslie establish it, or do you remember?
No, Leslie purchased a bunch of because the sea salt production has been going in the basin since the 1800s.
Okay.
And so Leslie had, there were several companies in the Bay Area producing sea salt, and Leslie purchased a whole bunch of them and kind of consolidated them. And then we purchased Leslie Salt.
Okay, thank you.
But those ponds themselves, I think we estimated back in the 1940s. So.
Okay, and so that's, all right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Andrews, please.
Thank you. I was curious when you mentioned Epsom salt and not sure about marketing that. I feel like a lot of people buy Epsom salt for soaking and just wanted to know if there would be any more exploration to that product.
Well, the simple answer is that the markets wouldn't accommodate the sort of volumes that we could produce if we were to process all of this material. And processing a little bit of it, we could have introduced some quantities into the market, but that doesn't do us much good in terms of needing to get all of the salts out of those ponds. It's just more volume than the market could absorb. And financially, well, the other thing worth mentioning too is the additional processing that would be necessary to purify the Epsom salts would be quite a bit more energy intensive than what we currently do out there. So it would require a significant investment in buildup of commercial type facilities in order to do that. So it just doesn't all piece together and make either financial or environmental sense to produce Epsom salts from what's accumulated in those ponds.
Okay.
Not yet at this stage, anyhow.
Okay. Yeah. One more question I have. Oh, did you have anything else? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's the basic answer. Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know if we're going to go over this in more detail, but I did see a slide of where the lines were going. Are we going to review the streets that are going to be impacted by the?
Yeah, we have some slides later with some more detailed maps.
Okay, thanks.
As we know, that's why some of us are tuning in today, because we have a lot of questions. So good for us. I've not seen any more from my colleagues. So my question is, when you're doing this process, you're using bay water to put with the salt. It's not fresh water. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the Cargill site, we would use bay water to create the brine, and then the fresh water that we use is the EBDA effluent. So that's a small volume of bay water to make it into a liquid that we can pump, but it would be at a very high salt concentration, and that would be
great. So we're not using any fresh water, or fresh water meaning potable water.
None whatsoever. Correct.
Okay. And then just as an aside, I was happy to hear that you have a PLA for the project agreement. I think that will eventually make your life a lot easier, especially in this Bay Area. So good for you. I'm not seeing any other comments or questions along this. So Jackie, if you want to take the next step.
Hey, thank you. So what I wanted to do with this slide is give the commission a sense of why I have been recommending that we continue to pursue this project despite its challenges, and why I think the time that we are investing is worthwhile for EBDA. And that has to do with both the benefits to EBDA and our drivers, our obligations. And so I wanted to start with this quote from the JPA, and this is both the new and old JPA has this language. It says the purpose of the agreement is to provide for the more efficient disposal or discharge to San Francisco Bay, as well as reclamation of the wastewater produced in each agency's jurisdiction, all to the economic and financial advantage of each agency and otherwise for the benefit of each agency. And so that is really intended as a reminder that our role as EBDA is to process the wastewater that is produced within our jurisdiction. And this is a non-traditional wastewater. It's a little bit different than obviously what comes through the collection systems to your plants, but it is still a wastewater that is generated within EBDA's service area. And so to the extent that EBDA helps to sustainably discharge it to the Bay, that's consistent with our mission and our creating legislation. We also have an opportunity to utilize excess capacity that's available in our existing infrastructure. So, the pipelines that we have are oversized for day-to-day flows. That's partly because they can, or mainly because they convey those higher capacities during wet weather. But during the dry seasons, and that the dry season's getting longer and longer each year in these drought conditions, during dry weather, there's excess capacity in our system. And so shouldn't that be put to its best use to serve our community? There is obviously also a financial piece to this, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into a review of the term sheet that we signed with Cargill. But any revenues that would be associated with this project would ultimately go back to our member agencies' ratepayers or offset other expenses. And then another thing that we've been thinking about is the opportunity to benefit from newer improved infrastructure that will be more corrosion resistant and resilient to higher salt levels. So as we move forward through a world where climate's changing, the water conservation measures are likely to get more significant. So our flows will be dropping, our wastewater will be getting more concentrated, and we'll be looking to increase recycling. All of those factors lead to a more concentrated and a more salty stream that will be flowing through our pipes. And so if we have this opportunity to work with Cargill to upgrade our infrastructure now, whether that's, improvements to our facilities to make them more salt resistant, we'll talk a little bit about that, or, installation of a new line that could later be used as an EBDA brine line or a brine line for our member agencies, that has benefit to the EBDA members as well. And then lastly, we think this is a good way to solve Cargill's problem for the benefit of the Bay, supporting efforts to improve the resilience of the Bay to sea level rise, and removing these salts in the most environmentally efficient and effective way, we think is the right thing to do at a staff level. And so, again, we want to keep checking in with the commission about this, but we think there's a direct nexus to our mission. There's financial benefits, there's infrastructure benefits, and environmental benefits to the project. So that's why we keep working so hard, even though we've had a lot of challenges as this project has moved forward. Let's see, there we go. So I wanted to spend a few minutes reminding the commission what was in the term sheet that we adopted back in July of 2020, which feels like a lifetime ago. And some of the current commissioners were here for that, but we also have some new folks. And so wanted to spend a few slides just reminding us what was in that term sheet. This was a non-binding term sheet. So, we do have an opportunity to revisit these terms, and we will as we continue drafting the legal documents that will govern this project, and as we learn more about the project. But these were kind of the terms on which we agreed to continue working together. So the idea was that the initial term was through the expiration of the current JPA, which is June 30th, 2040. As Tim mentioned, Cargill has an interest to have an agreement and continued use beyond that, but that's something that we'll need to talk about and understand the legal ramifications of. The term sheet also said that at the end of the term, that EBDA would have a first right of refusal to purchase or retain ownership of the pipeline. And then it talked about 0.9 to 1.8 MGD of brine would be discharged with upper limits on discharge rates and concentrations. And so again, this range is directly related to how long the project would take. So there was that question about how long it'll take to get all the salt that's accumulated in those ponds. It's somewhere between 10 to 20 years, and that really depends on how much they're transferring at a time. Key financial terms. So the proposed fee structure that was built into the term sheet was based on the fee structure at that time for industrial discharges to USD. And you may recall that at the time we were assuming this discharge would be connected immediately downstream of USD. And so that's why, just for convenience, we use the USD discharge rates. And so we agreed to a capacity fee of 5 million that would be made as a series of milestone payments. And we still need to agree on those milestones exactly, but Cargill has transferred 100,000 as kind of an initial down payment on that $5 million capacity fee. And then the flow-based fees would be 43.70 per mg per million gallons of brine in December 2020 dollars. And so there is an annual increase factor. So if you assume 2.5% annual inflation, which seems quaint in our current times, but may revert to that, we're talking about $35 million in these flow-based fees over a period of 20 years. Obviously, if we transfer the material faster at higher flow rates, then the funding would be advanced over the 20 years. So we're talking about a $40 million project in the terms that are in the term sheet, the 5 million capacity fee, and then about 35 million of flow-based fees. The allocation of revenues among the member agencies has not yet been established, and I starred that because that's a separate conversation that we need to have. We've tabled that for the moment because really, if we can't make the project work, then it's a moot point. So we've been focusing on collaborating to move the project forward, and then separately we'll have negotiations among ourselves about how those fees would be allocated. During project development, Cargill has agreed to pay all reasonable fees and costs, including EBDA's labor and consulting costs related to permitting and regulatory approvals, due diligence, and design, construction, and connection of the pipeline. And then EBDA would serve as the lead agency, or is serving as the lead agency for CEQA, with the contractor paid for by Cargill. So in summary, for this slide, basically Cargill is reimbursing EBDA for all of our expenses associated with this project. And as was shown in the commission report on this item, that's totaled almost $1 million to date. And you know, that includes a markup on our labor to cover benefits and overhead expenses. So basically there's no money that's been coming out of, or is expected to come out of, EBDA's pocket to fund this project. Really, EBDA's investment is in the opportunity cost of, you know, what else I might be doing with my time, but the financial is all reimbursed. And then during project operation, Cargill would be responsible for any additional monitoring and reporting that we collectively agree to, and the operations and maintenance associated with the system. So before we get into the due diligence, any questions on the term sheet or the financials?
I do have a question. Angela, this is a hand from before, is that correct? Okay, I have a question. Why only 20 years? Why are you not going to need this if, I know it took a whole bunch of years to get to this part where you had this much salt and you have to get rid of it, but why are you not leaving it open to then continually get rid of the salt that builds up?
So I'll start. Cargill has expressed an interest for this to go beyond 20 years. I think there was hesitation when we discussed this with the MAC about committing to a timeline that goes beyond the length of EBDA's JPA.
Okay, all right. So it just wasn't making sense, but there is talk. I'm just not there yet. Okay, Commissioner Duncan, you have a question. And
Unmute. So, Jackie, you said that one of the terms was for us to have first choice of taking ownership of the pipeline. Mm-hmm. How would that look? I mean, if it's an adjacent, you know, parallel line with our transport system now.
Yeah, so once Cargill builds the pipeline, identifying the route, as we've seen, is the most challenging part, and building that pipeline. Once it's in place, it is now an asset that could be of use to EBDA in the future. For example, if Union Sanitary District decided to implement a large-scale potable recycling project, and they had a reverse osmosis concentrate brine stream that they needed to dispose of, this would be a logical asset to use for that. Or we could sell rights to it to our partners at San Jose or further east in the Central Valley who are trying to get rid of salt. Basically, having a pipeline go through this area that is salt resistant is of potential benefit. When we say first right of refusal, if we don't see a benefit at that time, then we can decline. It's just a matter of if that asset has value to us, we would have first right of refusal to it.
Thank you.
Looks like all the questions we have so far.
Okay. Great. So we'll get into a little bit of the key due diligence issues. And this is most of what you've been hearing from me over the past year in terms of evaluating what the potential impacts are of this project to EBDA's compliance and infrastructure, and working with our consultants and with Cargill to identify ways to address those potential impacts. So when we went into this project, we anticipated that water quality and NPDES compliance issues would be the highest bar, the most concerning aspect of the project. And we did some sampling and modeling early on that showed that it's very unlikely that we would have significant impacts from the brine toward our compliance. There's sufficient dilution. The brine is pretty much clean salt water, and salt is not a regulated contaminant. And so there's just not anticipated to be a significant impact. As Tim said, we would monitor to make sure that nothing changes in that respect. And we would have provisions in the contract that protect us from a compliance standpoint. But when we presented this project and the data we have to the water board, the quote from them was, "I don't see any red flags. I don't even see any yellow flags." Really, they were supportive of this concept and this project. So the way that we are approaching this is that our new permit, which is expected in July 2022, would have certain provisions that are triggered upon notification by EBDA that the brine discharge has started. And without that, we would continue with our existing provisions. We looked also at scaling and sedimentation. There was concern that we would get a buildup of sediment, for example, as the brine traveled through our system. The work and modeling that we've done has shown that this is not expected to be a significant issue, but again, it's something that we will monitor. Another item that we've been looking at is bacteria and chlorination. We aren't necessarily expecting that the brine would have bacterial contaminants or that it would need to be chlorinated, but the presence of the brine does have a chlorine demand that would lead to us having to increase our chlorination potentially to overcome that demand. And so we have Carollo engineers doing some testing to evaluate that so that we can work out the financials of that in the agreement. Pipeline corrosion is really where we've spent the bulk of our effort and what has really driven the project changes that we've talked about so far. So as Tim mentioned, the brine is expected to lead to accelerated corrosion, particularly in segments of the pipe that have air entrainment. So our pipe is a force main. That means that the flow is pumped, And you would anticipate that when you're pumping into a full pipe. But just because of the topography, there are sections of our pipe, particularly between Union and Hayward, and a little bit beyond Hayward toward Oraloma, where the pipe does not typically flow full. And the air gaps in that pipe lead to this accelerated corrosion reaction in the presence of the chlorides in the brine. And so in order to address that, we have looked at a number of options that I'll talk about in the next slide. But this has really been the most significant driver of the project changes. The brine is also expected to lead to accelerated corrosion of exposed equipment where it comes into contact. And so with the extended pipeline, we're looking at potential impacts to OLEPs and MDF, and we're currently Brown and Caldwell is recommending protection measures for that equipment. Most likely, what we're going to do is connect the brine downstream of OLEPs so that we avoid that entirely. But we are looking at what would be needed if we connect, for example, at the OLEPs wet well, in order to make sure we have a good comparison and understanding of what the requirements would be. And this is things like, replacing pump parts and valves and other equipment with different materials that are more resistant to brine. And again, if we make these changes, as I talked about, that does have benefit as our effluent potentially gets saltier down the road. So spending a little more time on this corrosion piece, we basically have looked at two different approaches for addressing corrosion. So if we were to connect downstream of the Union pump station, down where my cursor is, then what we would do is slip line vulnerable sections of the pipe. So the areas in purple are the areas that currently have that oxygen, presence of oxygen, that those lower flows that would lead to higher corrosion. And so that's why by connecting at OLEPs instead, we avoid those purple sections. So either we line the purple sections to protect them, or we avoid the whole thing by connecting further downstream. I will note that there are studies that are ongoing. There's actually experimentation being done by one of Cargill's consultants to look at what is the residual risk to the sections that flow full. So for example, if we connect here, does the dissolved oxygen in our wastewater lead to any increased corrosion risk in these sections that are further downstream? The literature says that risk should be very low, but we want to try to understand it as well as we can. So there's additional work ongoing to look at that. So that brings us to, if there's a parallel pipe, then we would be connecting at or just downstream of OLEPs, and that leads to multiple routes that are under consideration for this 15 miles that Tim talked about, and that's really the crux of what the recent work has been focused on. So before I get to those routes, which is what I know you all want to see, I just wanted to touch on, if we were unable to find a pipe route that is feasible, and we decided to go the slip lining route, this is what slip lining looks like. Basically what you're doing is installing a new plastic pipe within the existing reinforced concrete pipe. And that would protect those segments of pipe from the accelerated corrosion. We've done hydraulic modeling to show that there shouldn't be an impact from reduced capacity. Obviously, we'd need to discuss that further, but that's the slip lining approach. The challenge with slip lining is that it's a pretty big disruption to our operations. We'd have to divert the flow for the time that we're under construction, bypass it around these segments, and the segments in question go through some environmentally sensitive areas like wetlands. So this is would be a challenging project to undertake. So that's why we've been focused on these brine pipeline routes that would that would take the brine beyond beyond Union. So this first, what we're looking at here is the south end, and we've been talking a lot about pipeline routes to OLEPs, but just as a reminder, even if we were to go with the original pipeline and connect at Union, we still have 9 miles of pipeline to figure out. And so this is the proposed or potential street route in blue for the southern portion that goes through Fremont, Newark, and Union City. And then a Bayside route we've been looking at as an alternative that goes kind of along the edges of Cargill's ponds. We've been focused on this street route for a couple reasons. One is just a practical timing consideration, and we've talked about this here before, that Union City has a proposed bike lane project on Union City Boulevard that parallels the pipeline route that we are proposing. And what we don't want to do is be in a situation where they make this beautiful redone street with new bike lanes, and then we come in a year later and tear it up to put in a pipe. That's just not tenable. So we've been trying to coordinate with them to lay the pipeline as they're doing their project. They were originally proposing to construct their project in 2022. They've delayed that by 1 year, but really we would need to have CEQA complete towards the end of 2022 to begin construction in spring of 2023 to line up with their timeline. So if the street route through Union City is going to be feasible, it has to be accelerated. And the Bayside route, while it's really promising, has a lot more uncertainty in terms of getting, you can see that it's going through these environmentally sensitive areas. And so getting the state and federal resource agencies to give a green light to that project within the time constraints that we're working with for the Union City street segment just makes it challenging and motivates us to make the street, to accelerate the work on the street route, essentially. So that's the southern end. And then I wanted to get into the northern end a little bit, and then I'm sure you all have questions. And so there's one more slide on routes after this, and then we can talk a little bit about it. So as you get into the northern part, so now we're in the sort of newer extended pipeline areas, and we've been looking at a city street route, a Bayside route, and a rail route. The rail route, we don't think that it's feasible throughout this length because Union Pacific requires 35 feet of buffer between the center of the rail and the pipeline, and that space just isn't available through this dense area, but it may be in certain segments, and we'll talk about that. This proposed street route goes down Hesperian to Grant, as we've talked about before, and I'll show an alternative to that on the next slide. And then we have that continued Bayside route, which basically parallels the EBDA force main through the northern sections. So I want to talk about this one other potential alternative, and then I'll pause and we can look at these maps in more detail as you're interested to do so. But this is an alternative to this city street route along Hesperian. We heard Hayward's feedback with concerns about the potential disruption of Hesperian, which is a very high quality paving and also obviously a highly trafficked area with neighbors that could be impacted. And so Cargill's also been looking at this alternative route that goes through more industrial areas, still along city streets, but less trafficked areas. We also have been looking at maybe a partial rail route that then connects with the western streets in order to avoid some of the traversal along Hesperian. So we will be meeting with Public Works Director Mary from Hayward this afternoon to talk a little bit more about these routes through Hayward, but just wanted to share with the commission that you know, the feedback has been taken to heart, and we're just continuing to look at alternatives. I keep describing this project as a three-dimensional puzzle, because it seems like each option that we come up with has its challenges, and we're trying to fit it within other constraints. I was never that great at Rubik's Cube, but we're trying to keep spinning it to get it to line up. So I have a slide that kind of goes through some of the options and the key challenges, basically to just illustrate that there is no easy 15-mile pipe route through the dense Bay Area corridor that we're talking about. But we're just kind of trying to choose the lesser of the evils. But maybe before I go through this, I'll just pause to take questions and feedback about what I've presented.
So some feedback I have about Union Pacific is just doing your homework, because every single, I work with the Air Quality Board, BACMA, I work with ACTC, and my city, plus other cities in Alameda County, have had different projects to try to involve the Union Pacific, and maybe a bigger national company like Cargill might have some pull, but so far we've not been real successful in negotiating with Union Pacific. And if it is their land, it seems like it's, for some reason, it's more valuable land than the rest of the land in our city. So just something to keep in mind. So Commissioner Andrews, you have a question or a comment?
Thank you, Chair. I agree regarding Union Pacific, and was, first of all, thank you for finding an alternative. And I'm happy that Director Mary is going to be reviewing this afternoon. And I am interested in that rail option, and wanted to know if it's a possibility that you can work with Union Pacific in terms of doing some kind of agreement with cleanup. Maybe that can entice them a little bit more to come to the table, because we are seeing a lot of encampments on rails. And so just wanted to know if we can partner and offer that as a condition of their contract to help with encampment and cleanups, and offer partnership with the city to make sure that people have resources available to them and alternatives for housing, because these areas are getting impacted in our community.
Thank you. We've been trying to schedule a follow-up meeting with the people from Union Pacific to talk about this latest alternative, which Jackie mentioned, but the segment that we're looking at for this alternative route, we may have enough space, the 35 feet with that route, but we need to have the follow-up meeting with them. But I'll mention that as well when we do talk to them.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Duncan, please.
Jackie, could you go back to that slide that shows the routes?
This one or the higher level one?
Yes. So my question is, for the blue line, who is Cargill working with to work out whatever issues there may be on the Grant Avenue route? Since that's unincorporated, it's not a city. Are you working with, have you contacted the county planning office or Public Works?
County Public Works.
Have they?
Yes. Dawn, did you want to?
Oh, we met with them. We reviewed the route with them.
And what was their reception?
There's still, I mean, it was kind of an introductory meeting, and we didn't go into a great deal of detail. We've got working to schedule a follow-up call with them to discuss this further. We didn't get any response saying that this is not workable at all. But we presented it to them, and they had to take it back to review it with their internal team.
Because there's, as I said in our last meeting, there are two schools on that particular 2 mile stretch,
Right.
an elementary and a high school. and, you know, would be very disruptive. And then what are the downside to the Bayside route?
So the downside, there's kind of the impact and then the practical consideration. So the impact would be, you know, we're going through wetlands and we would, you know, Cargill would be doing everything in their power to protect the impacted species by, you know, directional drilling under the wetlands and so forth. But these, you know, these are segments of wetlands that have endangered species. And so they're, you know, those are the potential concerns. The practical is what I mentioned regarding timing, that just the ability to get permits from the resource agencies for the construction in those areas that have endangered species habitat may take longer than Union City has to wait for us on the Union City street route. And so we're just, I mean, I'm not putting that out there as a reason not to continue pursuing the Bayside route. We are, but there's just, that's part of this three-dimensional thing that we're trying to fit this all into, that if we pursue the Bayside route and in, you know, July of 2023, the resource agencies get back to us and say, we can't give you a permit. Well, now we've missed the window on the street route and we're really stuck. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, but you know, as I said earlier, it's okay to disrupt humans, but not.
Well, that's the trade-offs. I mean, it really is.
I just think,
you know, yeah.
To me, it's looking at these options. The less intrusive one to me would be the Bayside. It may be more of a challenge as far as the permitting, but thank you for your response.
Okay, seeing no more questions, comments, please continue.
Okay, so this slide just really kind of sums up the challenges associated with each of these routes. And I think Commissioner Duncan hit on something that is what we've been struggling with, is we're going to impact people or we're going to impact critters, no matter where we go. And what are the implications of that? And how do we mitigate those impacts on both sides? So the slip lining, continuing to have a connection near USD. There's disruption to EBDA during construction and significant bypass pumping, as I mentioned. There's that residual risk to EBDA for the unlined sections that we're still working to quantify. And that option does still have the coordination with Union City on the bike path project, because we still have to build the initial segment of pipeline. The street route has impact on paving of streets that are currently in good condition, disruption to traffic during construction related impacts on neighbors, and I would put schools and families in that category as well. And then we do have that coordination with Union City. With the parallel pipeline through the Bayside route, we have the disruption to the Bay Trail, work in environmentally sensitive areas, long lead time and uncertainty regarding permitting. And then another issue that I didn't touch on is the South Bay Salt Ponds is planning some significant improvements and construction at Eden Landing. And so we would need to coordinate very carefully with them also, so that we didn't sort of preclude a window where they've, recently done construction and reconfigured the area at Eden Landing, and then we come in and want to build a pipeline. So there's a coordination challenge there as well that we just need to work through. And then the rail route, as we've talked about, we don't think there's sufficient space from the tracks in all segments. And as Commissioner Cutter noted, coordination with Union Pacific is challenging, but we are continuing to pursue that, at least for the segments that we do think are feasible. So just a couple slides to wrap up, and then happy to have any additional comments and questions. The next steps are really to continue this due diligence process and the route evaluation, which includes ongoing discussions with cities and the county regarding pipeline alignment and options for property rights. We are continuing to develop an environmental impact report. Right now, we're looking at the Hesperian route, but we are continuing to evaluate whether that is the preferred route. And we're targeting completion late this year, early 2023. And then in parallel with all of that, we're developing and negotiating an operating agreement between Cargill and EBDA that would govern how this project operates and how EBDA is protected if and when this project gets built and put into operation. And that really, you know, my focus in that and the focus of our attorneys is to make sure that we've properly evaluated and incorporated the costs and risks versus benefits so that EBDA is sufficiently protected and that this project benefits our collective ratepayers. So I know you all have had questions about, well, when does the commission get to weigh in? And obviously this, you know, this presentation and discussion is a time to get your feedback. The more formal consideration will be later this year or early 2023 when we bring the commission the EIR for certification. We also would be looking to the commission to approve whatever allocation of Cargill fees among the member agencies that we negotiate with the MAC. And then ultimately the commission will be asked to consider an operating agreement with Cargill. And that's really where the rubber meets the road in terms of agreeing to move forward with the project. Cargill's not going to start building this if they don't have an operating agreement with us. So that would be an important milestone. And I think with that, Cargill had some closing words, and then we can open it up for any other discussion.
Thank you, Jackie. Tim and I want to thank you for giving us an opportunity to present on this important project, proposed project for Cargill. You know, we're, you know, just Jackie's mentioned some of the challenges, but, you know, we're ready to partner with EBDA to move forward with this really significant work that Cargill is doing to address sea level rise adaptation and to protect the bay and the shoreline. You know, I think we've shown you this is the most environmentally responsible option for removing these mixed sea salts by returning them to the bay. And in addition to, you know, we've done some broad outreach to stakeholders on various government agencies, elected officials, environmental organizations for the pipeline option. And they agree that this is really the best path forward to address our mixed sea salt accumulation. And Jackie has mentioned the route and the process. It's been challenging, but you know, we remain confident that we can find a resolution that works best for all parties. So again, thank you for your time today as we discuss this project with you.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Quite lengthy, but really good information. And it's not quite the AQ project up in Sonoma, but it's this ongoing thing. And I think it was really timely that we had this and had the fact that we start from beginning to end and so forth. So really appreciate your time in giving us this update. You know, being San Leandro, we're on the top. We have a small part in this because we're not going to be as affected. But I do have to say, and I understand what you're saying, Rita, about the schools being affected and so forth. I'm looking at the environment as a whole. You know, you can interrupt somebody driving their kids to school, but if you kill a species, they're gone. And so I really want to make sure that we are, you know, looking at that from all of those sides. What I'm thinking is, of course, money is not the answer to everything, but, you know, sometimes a grant to a school could help them in ways that they didn't have the means to do before. And that is, you know, something that Cargill seems to have some money. So I would think that that would be something that, you know, we could look at. But certainly what I want to say from San Leandro's point of view is I'm going to really listen hard to my colleagues who are going to be more affected, because it's not fair for me to just say, oh yeah, let's do it, when I'm not listening to their reasons. So that's what we're going to do in San Leandro, is really listen to whoever has anything to say about this. With that, I'm open to somebody who has something to say about this. If we have any questions from our colleagues or even the MAC members. Okay, Commissioner Andrews.
I just want to reiterate that I am looking forward to seeing more discussion on the alternative plan, and just wanted to thank you for giving a thorough review of the presentation. I came in as a new commissioner and understood this was a large project, and Jackie's been very helpful explaining the impact to Hayward, and thank Alex and Mary for also explaining the impact to Hayward. So I just wanted to give my thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Duncan, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate your comments, Chair Cutter, but I also am a strong believer that when you disrupt people's life and time, you can't give time back either. You know, and I'm just thinking about when you, the kids, you know, walking in, just the disruption and the possibility that one of them may get harmed during all of this production. But I'm sure that there's a lot of, there would be a lot of traffic coordination and those kinds of things. But I appreciate the presentation as well, because I'm a new member, and seeing just the whole approach to trying to solve this brine project is, I really appreciate it, and just hope Cargill is sensitive that when they do get into negotiation on the grant part of the line that they're considering, that the community that they are dealing with is unincorporated. So they do not have the city structure as Hayward and San Leandro has. So thank you.
No, you're right. They don't have the eyes on as much of their elected officials. So I think that's our job then, to get those eyes on, right, Rita? To make sure they're there. All right. I'm not seeing any other, and I keep looking for public comments because that's what I do, and we don't have any. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for bringing this to us and describing it so well. I